Okay, this morning's a cool one. When you want to take a commercial property, little or big, what are the next steps? So you sort of like the property, but where do you go from here? So today's about moving into a commercial property. How do you do it? Stay tuned.
Good morning.
How are you?
I've titled myself the Intrigued Real Estate Agent this morning because I don't know anything on this topic.
So you're gonna be chucking the questions out thick and fast.
Yeah, alongside the live viewers, we're going to be throwing hot fire questions here.
Absolutely, that's a good point. And it is a live show. Any questions you got on this topic, throw them at us on the spot. We'll answer them. But this is about making people's dreams come true. So, you know, you've got you're in business. You've got a business. You want to take that next step. You start looking at properties. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's like, now what? with a residential, it's just like put an application in, get approved, move in, set a date, get the keys. But with commercial, I think there's a few more steps to it, it's interesting. I sit almost in front of Kim, one of our commercial agents, and I always hear her on the phone saying, never, whether it's a little barber shop or a little commercial shop or a $10 million site, it's the same paperwork. So, I think I'm right in saying it's similar steps. Doesn't matter what business you're putting in.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting. So yeah, where do you begin then?
Okay, so the dream goes, you start looking at properties, you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 properties, and you go, you know what, I really, really like this property, Mark. Where do I go from here? And what normally happens is everyone starts talking about, what's it going to cost me? Sort of what are the outgoings? So what's it going to cost me in terms of rent for the property? What's it going to cost me in terms of the outgoings for the property, which we'll talk about in a sec. And then it goes a little bit something like this, where I'll say, look, always happy to, the owner's thinking in this vicinity, always happy to put an offer into the owner. And let's get an offer sheet organised. And I do like it. I do sometimes refer to the offer sheet as a wish list. And we're going to show you one this morning, what it looks like.
This is a Novak wish list.
This is a wish list. So
this is what you give to, like, Mr. Novak, who's like Santa Claus on the day. Says, this is what I want for Christmas. Please bring it home.
That's it. And we'll say to the guys, go, look, what's an offer sheet? What is it? Well, guys, it's like a wish list. So we need you to complete this. And we provide this to the landlord to explain the terms and conditions and who you are and what you do. So it's very different to residential.
Just switched us round. Is that possible? Yeah.
Yep. Because often when the agent's on the phone and the landlord's like, what about this? What about that? What about this? With Resi, it's just the straight up per week rent for a residential property and how long you want the lease for. That's where it starts and where it finishes. Then we do a sort of integrity test on your finances. With commercial, let's hit it from the top.
Yeah, so
we want to know. Can you read that? Yep.
Oh, okay. We're going to go off the top. So, yeah, you're putting in you're testing my eyesight here. Effectively, you're outlining who you are, what you're doing, and how you want to do it. Underneath that, it breaks down into the rent per week, per month, per annum. I guess that's nice. People sometimes work off different calculations or different sort of cycles with rent or pay.
And that's the first thing that throws people off. The first thing that throws people off is the landlord may be thinking a per annum figure and the tenant may be thinking per week figure, and it gets lost in translation. So often a good commercial agent with a tenant will ask, what language do you want me to talk? Do you want me to talk per week? Do you want me to talk per month? Do you want me to talk per year? And continue that language in the negotiation to the end. Because what often happens is if that agent refuses to talk the language of the tenant, there's just this constant mix up on how much is that per week, how much is that per month, how much is that per month. It's always changing. So it's really good for a great commercial agent. We'll always get that language right to suit the tenant up to the beginning. That's why there's those 3 columns of per week. Now notice the plus GST. It's clearly stated on the offer sheet. Often a tenant can be thinking it's plus GST, and a landlord could be thinking it's not plus GST. So the offer sheet very clearly, guys, if you've just tuned in, we're talking about how to get a commercial property, how to apply on a commercial property. And some of these things are just keep it simple, stupid. Let's just make sure it's there, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. It's plus GST, this offer. Let's keep moving down.
No, we're getting really, really small. There's something there about a percentage. I think it's talking about, outgoings, whether that's inclusive. You were saying
that's exactly what it is. So Billy, outgoings is it's a moving target, and it's always negotiated with tenancies and discussed. So when you hear the term gross lease, they're just going for that one figure plus GST. They're not really worrying about outgoings. When you hear plus outgoings, you must find out what the outgoings are. We've got some buildings where the tenants have to pay over $100,000 on top of the rent because they're paying the outgoings on top.
Wow. So what would that be as an example? What business would cost that much in outgoings?
If it's a building that's got land, a landlord has the right to ask for a lot of things with outgoings. Well, get this. A landlord can ask you to pay their land tax bill as part of the outgoing.
Wow.
A landlord can ask you to pay their strata levies as part of their outgoings.
Wow.
A landlord can ask you to pay their water, including services, which you can't do with residential. Council rates, it's all in there. Now, where it gets tricky is all of those things are a moving target. They change every year. So this in the offer sheet is an estimation. And sometimes where it gets tricky, sometimes it's proportionate. On that land or the shop, maybe one of 2 shops, it may be the smaller of the 2 shops by 40% to 60%, and that's why there's a percentage in that section there. There's a percentage section saying there's an expectation to pay, say, 40%. So this is really important because it's cold hard cash coming out of the tenant's pocket. You want to get this right.
Yeah, for sure. I think you even said, and it may be in one of those columns below, there is a column that says how much the rent will go up.
Spot on. So as we keep moving down, sometimes we just and by the way, with the those outgoings, Billy, what a good commercial agent will do is they will do because some of this stuff gets charged quarterly. What a good commercial agent will do a floating estimate, slightly above the outgoings, and then at the end of the year, they'll remit back to the tenant a budget on what the actual costs were for outgoings, and they'll ask for a top-up, or they will rebate back some money depending on what it is. So they'll actually charge the tenant on a monthly basis an estimate on what it's going to be for the year, and then at the end of the year, they'll say, right, well, it was a little bit less, here's some money back, or it was a little bit more, here's an invoice. It's complicated.
Okay. There you go. So at this point, I'm just saying, or I'm thinking everything's negotiable. And for a tenant, if you know what the vendor wants, so you know what the owner wants, you can, try and dance around that with your offer, then you could be put in, really strong light, or even make a bit of a saving on the rent.
Absolutely. I can't zoom on that. No, I can't. So, and then the next one down.
Quick
we've
question before we move on. That bit, is it more common for people to pay outgoings or not outgoings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say these days probably 70% of these ones include outgoings. 30% will do a gross lease. The owner will just say, look, just pay me one figure and I'll just sort everything out in the end. So, but the nice thing about the outgoings for a landlord is if their costs, so for instance, if land tax goes up, they can simply just pass that straight across to the tenant if the tenants agree to outgoings.
Yeah, interesting.
Car spaces is the next one down. Interesting. It cannot be assumed. So you may see as a tenant of your lot that there's an allocation of 6 car spaces in front of your shop. Yep. And the landlord may already have allocated those car spaces to an adjoining shop. So you always want to actually talk about how many car spaces you are getting, and that's also different to residential. You get what you get what's allocated to the lot, full stop. Not always with commercial.
Interesting. Okay, very important, that one. Can you see what's below that? I'm now out of sight.
Annual review of rent. So there's a couple of different forms. You can have a fixed increase on rent, 3%, 4%, 5% are generally is what people ask. Now, again, depending on the temperature of the negotiations will be whether you're going to opt as a tenant to offer a 3% increase per year or a 4% per year or a 5%. Now, if your offer's really low, really shit, you may go, look, I want it low up front. I'll pay 5% increases and then we'll top it up every year. So every year, the rent will go up 5% on the present amount of rent that year. So she can really...
Is that compounding as well? So it's 5% on the 5%?
Hey, you're clever.
Yeah. It's not just a pretty face. Or it might be. Or not.
Which is big. And so if anyone that doesn't understand what Billy just said, it's so say the rent's 100,000 and say the increase is 5%. That means your rent's going to go up $5,000 in year 1. It doesn't mean your rent's going to go up $5,000 in year 2 because it's going to be in year 2. It's going to be 5% on the $105,000, and that's compounding.
And this all sounds pretty scary. I'm not going to lie. If I'm a small business owner, this is pretty scary. And let's not forget, it's not just a 12-month lease we're talking about. Sometimes here it's a 3 by a 3 by a whatever, or sometimes it's longer. What's the average, term these people are looking for generally?
We're going to come across to that in 1 second. Well, let's just if I may, let's just finish off. So we've done 3%, 4%, 5%. You nominate in the offer sheet, or you've got CPIs. Yeah. Now, CPIs has bitten people in the ass hard.
Why's that?
Because the inflation rate, the consumer price index, the inflation rate has now moved to about 7%.
Ooh. So where they thought they were getting around 3 or 4, now they're paying 7.
So every year it gets reviewed as per the consumer price index of Sydney, all categories. So at the moment, that CPI is sitting in excess of 7%. Now, there were times where this was sitting circa 2.5% year on year. You were sitting pretty. So some tenants are getting thrashed at the moment, and some landlords are saying, look, I understand 7% is too much, just pay 5, 4, 3, nothing, whatever.
And so can that be negotiated during the term? Because all these things have already been signed off.
Technically, no. But if both parties agree, why not?
Okay, there you go. Good to know. So ask the question, guys, if you're struggling and you're paying, what's considered unreasonable. Well, it's not unreasonable, but, it's tricky. But, ask the question, I think, if you're suffering.
Yep. Definitely. Now, another one in here is rent-free.
Yeah, I love this part. I'd be asking for 6 months rent free.
Right. So if you've got a really strong offer in and a really long lease, is probably a 10 by 10 by 10 or a 15 by 15, then you may actually ask for a 6 month rent free period. If you've got a real short lease, as in a 1 year lease, you may not ask for any or just a month. So literally what it says, it's rent and it's free for 1 month.
And do people, is there almost like a percentage you can work that out on as to what's sensible to ask for? Like you say, if I'm going for a year, maybe it's not a bad idea to ask for a month. Well, it's not too cheeky.
Yeah, and if you're doing a 1 year lease and you're asking for 6 months rent free, work it out. It's like, really? No.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, can we talk about lease length when you're taking a commercial property?
Yep. What's normal?
What is normal is it depends on the style of property and the style of business. So generally, the bigger the rent, the bigger the property, the longer the lease. The fatter the property, the fatter the lease.
Yep. And so the 3 by 3 by 3 or the 10 by 10 by 10 or the 15 by 15, does that mean it's 15 to begin with or 3 to begin with and then you review and you can make a decision at the next sort of breaking point? Or are you committing to almost the full 30 years or the full 9 years?
Killer question again. When you do a 3+3, the tenant has the right to walk after the first 3, but the landlord does not.
Right. And is that the same for the 10 and the 15?
Yeah. So generally with option periods, the tenant's got the right to go. Now, if tenants are building a great business based upon the premises, much like a restaurant or a food business, they really rely on the premises and foot traffic and stuff like that and being there. They really want a nice fat lease. So sometimes I get these tenants that want a 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. Now, they can pull out at any anniversary of 5. The tenant can, but the landlord can't. And the reason why someone would ask for those fat options is because they may sell the business. When they sell the business, they want to be able to, and they operate the business well for 5 years. On the first 5 years, they find someone who wants to buy the property. The person wants to, buy the business. The person that buys the first question they ask is, how long is the lease that you've got here? And they can turn around and go, well, we've got another 5 plus 5 plus 5, so 15. Adds value to the business.
That's really important. So I guess plan these things when you're setting up your business, because if you ever have the intention of moving, that's important to know.
Big time. And sometimes if it's kindergartens, they're very, very reliant on a really good 10-year lease. They spend a lot of money on a fit out. They've got a good reputation they're building in the area, so it's super, super important. Now, before we go, and I'm sure we miss some odds and ends, but if anyone's got any questions, let us know. But both parties will sign off on this. There's some terms and conditions that are in there. Now, having said that, it's an offer sheet, so it's actually it's not committal like a lease. Doesn't commit you like a lease. It's like a wish list. But as you can see, if you don't get this right up front with your agent, you can stress the negotiations, or I use the word fatigue. You can fatigue the negotiations because the landlord keeps asking these different questions mid negotiation, and then the tenant's going, really? Now you're going to ask this question, or now you're going to ask that question. So it's good to get all that stuff right and up front in your commercial offer sheet.
And how long does these negotiations usually last? Because with Resi, it's pretty quick.
It can be as quick as a day. It can be as long as a month.
Okay. There you go.
Because sometimes there's tenants are finding out, getting measurements, getting quotes, getting permits, and sometimes these tenants are actually increasing their offer as they line up more and more ducks, like a renovation quote or something. So they edge closer to the deal, and they don't necessarily do it on the day, on the spot.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, don't take on a lease that you can't put your business in. That'd be a disaster.
It happens. We had it happen in Hardwood Road where the lady wanted to put a puppy school, a dog school in, and council said no. She had to pay over $100,000 in rent while she was waiting for the permit to come through. It never came through. We had to relet the property.
Poor lady.
It happens, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Well, that's the commercial wrap, I think, this morning.
That's a commercial wrap. Billy, thank you. There's a lot in there, isn't there? And once you start unpacking it, you're like, wow.
Yeah, it's a good little segment for any prospective tenants and prospective landlords. You need to know this stuff. Your agent's got to be on this stuff.
I'm going to be sending this off to a lot of people when they start their lease, when they start their negotiations. Just say, here's the offer sheet, here's the video.
Good luck, guys.
Thanks, Billy. Cheers. Bye. Bye. Have a great day.